50 Cent is a chess player, and by the time we're done here tonight, that statement is going to feel less like an opinion and more like a police report. Pull up close, because what 50 Cent just did to Rick Ross in the last 48 hours is not a diss track, is not a shady caption, is not a petty Instagram jab you scroll past on the way to your morning coffee. This is a full-blown career funeral, with a program, a eulogy, and a casket that Rick Ross paid for himself. And by the time you see the mansion receipts, the Airbnb bombshell, the Tupac twist, the Eminem angle, the Street Fighter soundtrack rumor, and the black woman loyalty grenade that nobody on the timeline is willing to touch, you are going to understand exactly why every executive, every A&R, every publicist in the industry is quietly whispering that Rick Ross may have just walked straight into the deadliest trap 50 Cent has ever built in his entire 20-year career of trap building. Before we peel back a single layer of this thing, I want you to do me one small favor, because I need us moving as one unit tonight. Tap the like button, and I mean really tap it, not the sleepy thumb almost tap you save for videos you half agree with. Tap it like you actually understand what we are about to unpack, because we are stepping into a story that the surface-level noise merchants on every gossip page have completely fumbled. And the only way the algorithm delivers this breakdown to the people who genuinely need to hear it is if the numbers move fast on this end. Consider it your entry ticket, your handshake, your silent nod that says, yeah, I am ready for the real version of the story, not the dumbed-down cheerleader version being sold in 90-second reels. Because if you thought the 50 Cent versus Rick Ross beef had finally cooled down, if you thought Curtis Jackson had moved on to Hollywood permanently and left his old rival alone, if you thought this rivalry had exhausted itself after nearly 2 decades of shots, receipts, boxing challenges, streaming wars, and social media theater, you have been watching the wrong movie. 50 Cent is not done. Rick Ross is not safe. And what leaked, what got confirmed, what got said out loud in front of a live camera in the past 2 days has flipped the entire hip-hop conversation upside down. This is not a footnote. This is not a filler cycle. This is the exact chapter that historians will one day point back to and say that is the moment Rick Ross officially lost the narrative he had spent his entire career constructing. If you swipe away before we get to the mansion decode, you will genuinely miss the second the whole puzzle snaps into place. So stay locked. Let me walk you through it, brick by brick, because the way the blogs are reporting this thing is not just incomplete, it is dangerously incomplete, and I do not throw that word around lightly. Every reaction channel jumped on the Tupac announcement in isolation. Every gossip page jumped on the mansion in isolation. Every podcast jumped on the album sales angle in isolation. But nobody with a public microphone is stitching these pieces together in the correct order. When you actually line them up chronologically, when you actually place each event on top of the last one like transparency sheets on an overhead projector, what you are looking at is not a beef at all. What you are looking at is a psychological demolition. 50 Cent is the demolition contractor. And Rick Ross keeps politely signing the permits, brick by brick, floor by floor, until there is nothing left standing but a foundation slab and a cloud of publicity dust. Let me set the table properly, because context is everything in a story like this, and the folks who tune in without the backdrop are going to miss 90% of the layered brilliance. This latest chapter kicked off when Rick Ross released his newest studio album, a project he had been personally marketing for months, a project he stacked with more than 20 guest features, a project he described in interview after interview as one of the definitive chapters of his late career renaissance. And when the first week tracking data landed, the internet did not just react, the internet convulsed. Because the reported figure was, to phrase it as gently as possible, catastrophic. Whether the number was 22,000 units, whether it drifted slightly higher, whether it drifted slightly lower, the punchline was already carved into the timeline the second the trackers went public. And 50 Cent, being the shark that he is, being the culture assassin that he has been since the mid-2000s, being the man who has turned trolling Rick Ross into an actual creative discipline that ought to be studied in universities, pounced within hours. The memes started that afternoon. The reaction podcasts dropped by the next morning. By the end of the week, Rick Ross was trending for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with the actual music inside the album. And here is where the whole thing tilts sideways, because most rappers in Rick Ross's position would have engaged the sales conversation head-on. Most rappers would have clapped back with their own tracking numbers, released a diss single, or gone into press mode to defend the project on its artistic merits. Rick Ross did none of that. Rick Ross went the opposite direction. Rick Ross went into that laid-back, syrupy, slow-drip Miami cadence he has perfected over the years and started talking about the long game. About longevity. about how the modern flex, in his opinion, was refusing to inflate your streaming numbers with bots. He essentially declared, across half a dozen interviews, that he was not going to play checkers with 50 Cent because he was busy playing chess. On paper, that framing worked. Rose loyalists ate it up. It got printed as a slogan across the timeline for about 72 hours. It sounded like the wisdom of a seasoned veteran refusing to be dragged into a childish argument. It sounded, to some people, like grace under pressure. Here is the problem with that theory, and this is where the whole beef pivots. 50 Cent does not respect grace under pressure. 50 Cent hunts grace under pressure. He treats composure like a scent on the wind. The moment Rick Ross tried to float himself above the sales conversation and reposition the entire debate onto philosophical ground, 50 Cent zoomed in on every single lifestyle post Rick Ross had ever uploaded to Instagram and began dismantling them one by one with the calm patience of a bomb disposal technician who genuinely enjoys his job. The chicken wings got roasted. The car show got roasted. The features got roasted. The whole rollout got roasted. And right when the culture assumed the trolling had peaked, right when we thought Curtis had run out of angles, the mansion entered the chat. This is the exact moment my jaw hit the floor. 50 Cent walked onto Instagram and casually informed the entire hip-hop internet that the $100 million estate Rick Ross had spent years photographing, filming, walking through, giving MTV Cribs style tours of, and using as the crown jewel of his boss mythology, was allegedly available for booking on Airbnb. Let that sentence sit in your head for one full beat. Let it settle. Because 50 Cent did not attack the music. He did not attack the features. He did not attack the sales. He went straight for the aesthetic, straight for the visual identity, straight for the entire mood board Rick Ross has been meticulously constructing for almost 2 decades. He said, out loud, in front of the whole culture, that the crown jewel of the biggest boss brand was, in his opinion, a rental. He said everything is fake. Not the music, the house. Understand this on a strategic level, because this is precisely where the genius of the maneuver reveals itself. If your mansion is a rental, then what does the palm tree in the front yard actually mean? If your mansion is a rental, then what does the cigar on the balcony represent? If your mansion is a rental, then how much of the entire boss persona is real, and how much of it is an expensive weekend photo shoot? Those are not hypothetical questions I am inventing for dramatic effect. Those are the exact questions that started ricocheting through every hip-hop timeline within minutes of the post going live. You seeing what I am seeing? Rick Ross, to his real credit, did not just eat the shot in silence. He came back swinging, and on paper, he came back swinging hard. He looked into a camera, in that unmistakable Miami drawl, and told the young hustlers listening that if he wanted to sell 250,000 units in the first week, he could have done it. If he wanted 400,000, he could have done that too, allegedly for cheap. He pointed out that the artists Curtis Jackson was propping up could not even show a palm tree in their front yard while he was standing on a $100 million estate. On any other night, in any other beef against any other opponent, that would have been the mic drop of the entire week. In another era, that clapback would have shut the round down cold. Every headline the next morning would have led with it. But this is not any other beef, and Curtis Jackson is not any other opponent. 50 Cent does not react. 50 Cent redirects. 50 Cent absorbs the punch, studies the punch, catalogs the punch, and then detonates a completely different device on a completely different battlefield. Right when the culture was still chewing on the mansion exchange, right when the timeline was starting to tilt back in Rick Ross's favor even slightly, 50 Cent walked into a separate interview and dropped what may end up being the single most surreal announcement of his entire late career second act. He looked directly into the camera and casually let the world know that he has a brand new song fully mixed and ready for the upcoming Street Fighter movie soundtrack. And that this song does not just feature him. It does not just feature Eminem. It features Tupac. Yes, that Tupac. The Tupac who has been physically gone from this planet for nearly 30 years. The Tupac whose vocal legacy is arguably the most guarded, most litigated, most carefully protected voice in the entire history of American music. Not a sample. Not a shout-out. Not a reference. An actual featured verse baked into the track. When the interviewer, understandably, glitched a little in real time and asked whether this was one of those artificial intelligence voice clones everybody has been slapping onto YouTube uploads, 50 Cent shut that suggestion down immediately. No AI. He explained that the Tupac estate had officially approved the record, had delivered previously unreleased vocal material to the production, and had blessed the release. He said the paperwork was clean. He said the process was collaborative. He said the record was designed specifically as the anchor theme for the Street Fighter film. You could tell, watching his face during that clip, that 50 Cent understood in real time exactly how nuclear that piece of information was the second it left his mouth. Freeze that image in your head. 50 Cent, Eminem, Tupac, on one song, for a Street Fighter movie. If that record delivers the way Curtis is teeing it up to deliver, we are not talking about a hit single. We are talking about a generational cultural earthquake. Every radio station would rotate it into heavy play. Every streaming platform would push it to the front of every playlist. Every TikTok fight scene edit for the next 12 months would be soundtracked by it. Kids who have never voluntarily played a Tupac verse in their lives would hear one for the very first time and think it was brand new material. That is not marketing. That is generational imprinting. Which brings us straight back to Rick Ross. The moment that announcement began spreading, Rick Ross had approximately 100 different ways he could have played the moment. He could have stayed silent. He could have congratulated the collaboration diplomatically. He could have expressed neutral curiosity like the rest of the culture. He could have simply let the announcement breathe and reassessed his angle after the preview dropped. Instead, Rick Ross grabbed his phone, opened Instagram Live, and swung what he genuinely believed was a knockout haymaker. He mocked the collaboration. He said Curtis was about to drop new music with Eminem and Tupac, and then delivered the line that has been ricocheting across every hip-hop timeline ever since. He told the internet, quote, "Pac been dead 30 years, let the man rest in peace." In the same breath, he mocked Eminem, telling Curtis to put those G-Unit sneakers out, let them flop, and go do a Tony Yayo remix with Lloyd Banks. He laughed. He smirked. He filmed it in that unmistakable slow syrup Miami tone. If you slow the clip down and study his face, you can see the certainty of a man who genuinely believes he just landed a knockout blow. Here is where the psychological warfare reveals itself yet again. Rick Ross did not actually attack the music. He did not attack the collaboration mechanics. He did not attack the estate approval, or the Street Fighter marketing plan, or the timing, or the rollout. Rick Ross attacked the concept of a legacy artist being featured on a modern soundtrack, which, if we are being honest, is a swing that lands on absolutely no one. It does not land on Curtis, because Curtis did not make the decision alone. It does not land on the estate, because the estate has every legal and moral right to approve the record. And it does not land on the culture, because the culture is going to press play the millisecond the song drops, whether Rick Ross approves or not. Here is where it gets sharper, and this is the layer most breakdowns are missing tonight. The Tupac estate has spent decades being famously, aggressively selective about which projects gain access to unreleased material. Afeni Shakur, before her passing, and the estate architecture that followed her, have historically been the strictest gatekeepers in the entire music industry. If, and this is a massive if, the estate really did clear this record, that is not just a green light. That is a coronation. That is an anointing. That is the Shakur legacy machinery stamping its own approval on the collaboration. And Rick Ross, in trying to shame Curtis for the record, has essentially placed himself in the position of shaming the Tupac estate for approving the record. That is not a shot at 50 Cent. That is a shot at Afeni Shakur's carefully engineered legacy infrastructure. That is a shot most hip-hop veterans with functioning survival instincts would never take. You do not, under any conceivable circumstances, casually swing at the Shakur family in a public feud with 50 Cent. Especially not while the entire internet is watching in real time. You following where this is going? The surgical precision escalates from here. The very moment Rick Ross posted the Pac comment, the very moment the culture began debating whether the record should even be allowed to exist, Curtis did what Curtis always does. He pivoted. He did not defend the record. He did not explain the estate paperwork. He did not clap back on the Pac question at all. He picked up a completely different weapon and swung it right back at the mansion again. That is the choreography. That is the dance Curtis Jackson has been rehearsing since 2005. Right after Rick Ross ran his mouth about Pac, 50 Cent doubled down on the Airbnb angle. He essentially posted, "Look at this fool holding an open house on a mansion he does not even own." He essentially told the world everything is fake. And the internet, being the internet, went into full detective mode. Threads popped off. Screenshots circulated. Real estate accounts got tagged. Some accounts swore the property was a legitimate short-term rental. Others swore it was Ross's actual home and Curtis was fabricating. Nobody could conclusively prove or disprove either version. And crucially, nobody needed to. Because the damage was already done. That has always been the point. That has always been the play. 50 Cent does not need to prove anything. 50 Cent only needs to introduce doubt. The moment the doubt is planted, the moment the seed is watered, the moment the culture starts asking the question out loud, the entire persona starts leaking oxygen. Every future flex from Rick Ross now carries a footnote. Every future mansion photo now carries a whisper. Every future luxury post now carries a comment section stuffed with Airbnb jokes. That is what Curtis has been doing for 20 years. He is not fighting to win the argument. He is fighting to compromise the audience's ability to take Rick Ross seriously at all. There is a fundamental difference between those two objectives, and Rick Ross seems allergic to recognizing it. You seeing what I am seeing now? The layering is the entire story. Layer 1, album sales. Layer 2, chicken wings and car shows. Layer 3, features that could not save the numbers. Layer 4, mansion authenticity. Layer 5, Tupac and Eminem collaboration. Layer 6, sneaker line versus sneaker line. Layer 7, the very definition of what a real hip-hop boss actually looks like right now. Every layer is a fresh tunnel drilled into the foundation of Rick Ross's carefully engineered public identity. Rick Ross keeps responding to whatever punch just landed instead of stepping back, looking up, and identifying the pattern behind the punches. Now, here is where the tape gets genuinely disturbing. Inside the same wave of trolling, 50 Cent slipped in one of the most cutting pieces of moral context that nobody on the surface-level blogs is discussing tonight. Curtis essentially reminded the culture that Rick Ross had recently, in his opinion, thrown a black woman under the bus. He called Ross out for allegedly making excuses about being removed from certain shows, and Curtis implied that Ross put the blame on the woman who created those shows. Curtis said, "Be loyal to the black woman the way you are to Eminem." He said she gave you 3,500 episodes worth of platform, essentially. He said the shows were her shows, the concepts were her concepts, and yet in Curtis's telling, Rick Ross used her as the fall guy while draping himself in his loyalty to a white male superstar rapper. That right there is not a beef punchline. That is a character assassination dressed up in cousin talk. That is the kind of statement that reshapes how an entire demographic of listeners interprets every future move Rick Ross makes. This is the moment you can feel 50 Cent shift registers. Up to that point, the trolling had been punchline energy. Chicken wings, car shows, Airbnb mansions, sneaker jokes, silly, deniable, walkable back if the moment demanded. But that black woman loyalty line is moral. That line carries weight. That line follows a public figure into every future interview for the next decade. And Rick Ross, up to this moment, has not delivered a real answer to it. Not on Instagram, not in his stories, not in his interviews. He has deflected. He has pivoted. He has monologued about the long game and longevity and bots. He has talked about everything except that specific line. In a moment like this, silence reads as confirmation, whether it should or not. Moving right along, because we still have not touched the sneakers, and I know that sounds like a joke, but the sneakers are actually a real weapon in this thing. Part of Rick Ross's counter-energy has been attacking Curtis's G-Unit sneaker rollout. He said at one point those G-Unit sneakers are going to end up at Costco. He said he prefers the Lloyd Banks version to any of the other G-Unit versions. He essentially implied that the members of G-Unit outside of Curtis and Banks do not even have real sneaker deals. Then, because Rick Ross is Rick Ross, he added a jab suggesting that with the freeway not happening anymore, Curtis can now focus on the sneakers full-time. It was a layered shot. It was clever on the page. It almost worked in the room. When you zoom out, what Rick Ross is doing there is genuinely fascinating because he is trying to challenge 50 Cent on the entrepreneurial battlefield, which is historically the exact battlefield where Curtis Jackson has never lost a single skirmish. Vitamin water. Effin' vodka. Sire spirits. Horror movie production. Television production. Power. BMF. Ghost. Force. Canon. Book publishing. Podcast networks. Boxing promotion. Whether you personally like the man or not, the receipts on Curtis Jackson's business resume are a case study for the Wharton School. So when Rick Ross tries to poke at the sneaker line, he is essentially picking the one fight he is least equipped to win in the eyes of any business-literate viewer. It is like challenging a shark to a swimming contest inside the shark's own ocean. Curtis, of course, understands that at the molecular level. Which is precisely why every time Rick Ross fires at the business side, 50 Cent fires straight back at the persona side. Ross throws a sneaker jab. Curtis throws a mansion jab. Ross throws a features jab. Curtis throws an Airbnb jab. Ross throws a longevity monologue. Curtis throws a Tupac and Eminem announcement. Every exchange, if you actually chart it on a whiteboard, is Curtis trading up. Curtis is not defending the same ground twice. Curtis is escalating the stakes with every single response. He is turning every round into a bigger stage than the round before. That is not luck. That is not accident. That is design. That is somebody who has been running the culture at the highest level for 2 decades and understands at a genetic level exactly what moves a modern internet audience from a scroll to a stop. Here's where the tape flips one more time, and I need to be responsible with how I frame this. What I am about to describe is unverified. This is culture chatter. This is speculation. There are whispers circulating right now that the Street Fighter soundtrack record, if it actually delivers what 50 Cent is teasing, may end up being previewed at a major promotional event in the coming weeks. If that turns out to be true, and again, if the timing of Rick Ross's Pac comment could not possibly have been worse. Because the moment that preview lands, the moment fans hear the record with their own ears, the moment they hear a real Tupac verse alongside a real Eminem verse alongside a real 50 Cent verse over a cinematic Street Fighter themed instrumental, the entire Mansion debate becomes irrelevant. The entire album sales debate becomes irrelevant. The entire long game monologue Rick Ross has been performing becomes irrelevant. Because that record, if it lands the way it is being scripted to land, would be a generational moment. And Rick Ross, on his own Instagram, on his own timeline of his own free volition, has already publicly criticized it. Which means when the moment lands, if it lands the way Curtis is scripting it to land, Rick Ross will be forever remembered as the man who tried to talk the culture out of celebrating one of the biggest musical moments of the decade. And there is no more dangerous position in hip-hop than being the guy who publicly bet against the moment everyone else ended up loving. That is a career footnote you can never scrub, no matter how many albums you drop after it. Now I want to sit with the other side of this table for a second. There is a legitimate, sincere, respectable argument that some legends should simply be left alone. There is a real argument that, even with estate approval, even with previously recorded vocals, even with family blessing, hearing Tupac's voice on a modern soundtrack for a video game movie feels, to a slice of the culture, like a compromise of legacy. There is an argument that if the estate is going to release unreleased Pac material, the venue probably should not be a Hollywood popcorn action franchise. Those are all fair arguments. Those are all defensible positions. That is part of the reason Rick Ross's line initially resonated with a segment of the audience, because he tapped into a real cultural feeling, even if he tapped into it for the wrong personal reasons. But here's what Rick Ross seems to have missed. The strongest version of that argument does not arrive with a laugh track attached. The strongest version of that argument does not arrive with a Curtis-directed punchline stapled to it. The strongest version of that argument does not come from a rapper who has been in a public war with Curtis for over a decade. Because the moment the message becomes tangled up with the messenger's personal beef, the moment the concern becomes a shot, the moment the critique becomes a smirk, the entire moral weight of the position evaporates in real time. That right there is Rick Ross's fundamental problem in this entire feud. He keeps having good points. He keeps making them in bad ways. He keeps carrying valid arguments into the ring inside a broken vehicle. You still with me? We're about to reach the part where the whole picture snaps into focus. Almost at the part where you finally understand why Curtis Jackson has been laughing through every round. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you see it, every future Rick Ross post starts to look different in your feed. Once you see it, every future Curtis Jackson troll starts to feel intentional in a way it did not feel before. If you rewind the tape on Curtis Jackson's public playbook over the last 20 years, there is one pattern that reappears with mathematical consistency. Whenever Curtis is entering a new business phase, whenever Curtis is about to release a new project, whenever Curtis is trying to boost the visibility of a new venture, he provokes a beef. Not a random beef. A calculated beef. A beef with somebody who has enough name recognition to trend, enough emotional volatility to respond, and enough audience overlap to guarantee attention. Rick Ross checks all 3 boxes. Rick Ross has always checked all 3 boxes. Which is exactly why, out of every possible target on Curtis Jackson's radar, Rick Ross is the one he keeps returning to. Not because he cannot let it go. Because it works. Every single time, it works. This time, the timing lines up almost too perfectly. A new song is coming. A movie tie-in is coming. A soundtrack is being teased. Estate approvals are being announced. A Street Fighter film is on the horizon. Every troll post, Every mansion joke, every chicken wing punchline, every Airbnb caption, every pack reference is another ticker at the bottom of the internet's screen, keeping Curtis Jackson's name in every conversation right up until the record actually drops. Whether it is intentional or not, whether Curtis designed the choreography that way or not, the outcome is identical. Rick Ross is providing free promotion for a project he has already publicly criticized. That is the paradox of engaging Curtis in this era. Every time you swing at him, you are also unintentionally holding up the poster for whatever he is about to release next. Zoom out one more time. This is not just a beef between two rappers. This is a case study in how modern hip-hop celebrity actually functions inside the streaming economy. In the streaming economy, the beef is the marketing. The reactions are the album rollout. The Instagram post is the press release. Whoever masters that landscape is the person who runs the culture. Curtis has spent an entire decade mastering it. Rick Ross has spent an entire decade underestimating it. That gap, that specific gap, is why we are exactly where we are tonight. That gap is the whole story. If you take absolutely nothing else away from this breakdown, take this one line. Never confuse composure with strategy. Rick Ross has composure. Rick Ross has cadence. Rick Ross has that laid-back Miami boss aesthetic that photographs like power. But composure without strategy is just posture. You cannot posture your way past Curtis Jackson. He will find the crack. He will find the seam. He will find the mansion listing. He will find the black woman loyalty gap. He will find the Tupac angle. He will find the sneaker weak spot. He will find whatever is closest to the surface and drag it into the light with a caption and a laughing emoji. Then he will do it again the next day. And the day after that. Until the target either responds emotionally and gives him more material, or goes silent and gives him the appearance of surrender. Do not expect this feud to cool down anytime in the immediate future. One Instagram post from either side is all it takes to reignite the entire cycle. One quote in a podcast, one photo at an event, one lyric on a leaked track, one comment underneath the wrong post, and we are right back here breaking down the next exchange, watching the next Airbnb joke, watching the next mansion clapback, watching the next pack reference. This thing does not have an ending. This thing has episodes. And we are, at best, midway through the current season. Maybe even earlier than that. Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave you with tonight. Underneath all the memes, underneath all the trolling, underneath all the shots and countershots, there is a real question buried in this beef. What does longevity actually look like when the numbers stop cooperating? Does longevity look like Rick Ross digging in on the long game, refusing to compete on first-week sales, leaning on his catalog, his lifestyle, his image? Or does longevity look like Curtis Jackson pivoting to Hollywood, pivoting to television, pivoting to franchise film soundtracks, pivoting to horror, pivoting to boxing, pivoting to whatever medium keeps his name in the algorithm? Those are the questions every hip-hop veteran currently in his 40s and 50s is asking himself right now, whether he says it out loud or not. There is no clean answer. Both models have defenders. Both models have critics. Both models have real-world receipts. What we are watching in real time, on our screens tonight, is the war between those two models being played out with two of the loudest personalities the genre has ever produced. Every joke, every jab, every mansion crack, every Tupac announcement, every Airbnb caption, every G-Unit sneaker punchline is really just a proxy skirmish inside that larger philosophical war. That is what makes this beef different. That is what makes it sticky. That is what makes it refuse to die. That right there is why this beef matters. That is why it keeps trending. Because it is not really about Curtis. It is not really about Rick Ross. It is about which version of veteran hip-hop success is going to define the next 10 years of the culture. Whichever man wins the narrative wins the blueprint. Whichever man wins the blueprint wins the next wave of artists trying to follow it. That is why the stakes are actually enormous, even when the surface content looks like Instagram jokes, chicken wing punchlines, and mansion memes. Here is the piece that keeps me up at night. The thing Curtis Jackson understands, that Rick Ross either cannot or will not understand, is that in the modern attention economy, being talked about is more important than being right. Being trending is more important than being correct. Being unforgettable is more important than being universally liked. Curtis does not care if half the internet thinks he is being petty. He cares that all of the internet is paying attention. Every single time Rick Ross responds, every single time Rick Ross comments, every single time Rick Ross posts a reaction video, Rick Ross is voluntarily walking into a room Curtis has already rigged. That is the entire secret. That is the entire scam. That is the entire genius. Curtis is not fighting for the win. He is fighting for the frame. Whoever controls the frame controls the story, controls the algorithm, and controls the culture. One final receipt. Rick Ross has spent his entire career selling us a specific fantasy. The mansions, the cars, the features, the chains, the cigars, the private jets, the palm trees, the Miami skyline, the Wingstop empire, the luxury real estate flexes. Every piece stitched together into one cinematic mood board the culture bought into, screenshotted for motivation, and quoted on podcasts as proof hip-hop can still build empires. Curtis Jackson tonight is not challenging one piece of that mood board. Curtis Jackson is questioning the entire mood board. Every follow-up post from Curtis is a fresh crack in the frame. Rewind every previous chapter of this rivalry, and the pattern rhymes with embarrassing consistency. The record deal jabs, the boxing challenges, the streaming wars, the sneaker line trolling, the mansion Airbnb allegations, the Tupac and Eminem announcement. Every chapter follows the identical choreography. Rick Ross builds a flex. Curtis studies it. Curtis locates a crack. Curtis posts about the crack. Rick Ross responds emotionally. Curtis uses the emotional response to launch the next takedown. The cycle repeats until Rick Ross decides the arithmetic of engagement no longer works in his favor. Which, based on this week, he has not decided. So there it is. That is the tape. That is the receipt. That is the full breakdown. Do not sleep on the next 48 hours, because if Curtis drops even one preview clip of that Street Fighter record, the entire game changes overnight. If Rick Ross doubles down on the Pac critique after the culture actually hears the preview, hip-hop might finally pick a side once and for all. Either way, buckle in, because this is 50 Cent versus Rick Ross, chapter however many we are on, and the season finale is nowhere in sight. Now let me hear you in the comments, because half of my next breakdown always starts inside your replies. Do you think Rick Ross should have stayed silent on the Tupac record? Do you think Curtis Jackson has taken the trolling one step too far? Do you think the Airbnb mansion claim is real? Or do you think 50 Cent is bluffing for engagement? Do you believe the Tupac verse ever sees the light of day? Or do you think the estate quietly pulls the plug the moment the culture pushes back too hard? Do you think Rick Ross ever recovers the narrative? Or is the biggest boss brand permanently dented no matter what he drops next? Do you think this ends with a truce, a public reconciliation, or does it end the way most Curtis Jackson beefs end, with one man still posting memes years later while the other man politely refuses to say the name in interviews? Whatever your take is, drop it. Let it live. Let the comment section debate it. Because I read every single response. If you want the follow-up the second the next round of shots gets fired, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, turn notifications on. When the next chapter of this drops, I do not want you finding out about it from some blog that has half the information and none of the layered context. I want you finding out about it from me, with every receipt, every screenshot, every quote, every angle, every hidden layer nobody else is willing to spell out on camera. If you are still with me right now, you are one of the real ones. Tap the like one more time on your way out. Check the suggested video on your screen, because I already loaded up the next breakdown you are going to want. Catch you on the next one. Take care.